Hello, you're watching the Debka Files, a weekly roundup of exclusive news, insight and analysis from the Middle East, broadcast to you from the heart of the region. Coming up on the programme today. US Vice President Mike Pence is set to visit the region this week amid widespread outrage over the American administration's recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The commander of Iraq's Iranian-backed militia is filmed in southern Lebanon, overlooking the Israeli-controlled towns of Metula and Kiryat Shmona in the Golan, sparking concerns over the bolstering of Shiite troops there. And a song for Christmas, as Syria's most famous choir hits a high note in Damascus. Now to our top story. The US Vice President is set to visit the region this week with a two-day stop in Israel. Mike Pence will speak at the Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, meeting with top officials as well as visiting the Holocaust Memorial and Western Wall in Jerusalem. Ahead of his upcoming trip, the administration released a statement regarding the status of Jerusalem, saying the Western Wall will always be part of Israel, but that the specific boundaries will be part of any final status agreement with the Palestinians. This after Trump announced the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Palestinians and much of the region erupted in protest of this announcement, the Palestinian Authority refusing to meet with any US officials over the peace process and severing contact with Washington.
بالتأكيد نحن كنا قد أخذنا قراراً بأنه لن يكون هناك أي اتصال رسمي من أي مسؤول فلسطيني مع أي مسؤول أمريكي. هذا القرار ملتزمون به حتى كما تعلمون هناك زيارة لنائب الرئيس الأمريكي بنس إلى فلسطين في 19 من هذا الشهر. تم الإعلان رسميا أن الرئيس محمود عباس لن يلتقي بنائب الرئيس الأمريكي بنس.
Initial reports suggesting Trump's son-in-law and regional advisor Jared Kushner has reached an understanding with the Saudi Crown Prince on a new plan to resolve the conflict. This after meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas in Riyadh. The plan includes dropping the Arab Peace Plan of 2002, dropping the demand that Israel accept a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, and establishing a state in the Gaza Strip and parts of northern Sinai. Reportedly, when Abbas asked about the West Bank, Jerusalem and the settlements, the Crown Prince said, "These are issues for negotiation between the states of Israel and the state of Palestine," pledging to help the Palestinians. Meanwhile, protests continue in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. Over the weekend, 4 Palestinians were shot dead by Israeli troops during protests over the status of Jerusalem. Medical officials saying 150 others wounded. Most casualties on the Gaza Strip border, where 2 protesters, one of them wheelchair-bound, were killed.
جراء ما يقوم به جنود الاحتلال للانتهاكات أمام الأقصى المسجد الأقصى المبارك واليوم هي جمعة الغضب بما أدى إلى استشهاد الشاب باسل جراء إطلاق النار المباشر على الصدر أصيب بالصدر ووصل إلى المستشفى مستشهدا.
Debka sources on the ground pointing out some demonstrators were holding placards depicting Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. He's the commander of the Al-Quds Revolutionary Guards Force. This after rockets were fired from inside the Strip again Sunday night, marking some 20 rockets fired since Trump's declaration on Jerusalem. Debka sources revealing the order to fire 1 rocket last Wednesday came directly from General Soleimani in a phone call with the commander of Hamas's military wing, Marwan Issa, marking the first direct phone conversation between a high-ranking Iranian general and the Hamas commander. Israel, for its part, has closed the border crossing with Gaza and struck 6 facilities belonging to Hamas, of course, the rulers of the Gaza Strip. To discuss all that, let's bring in Dr Martin Sherman of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies here with us in studio. A lot going on here. Let's start with a visit of the US Vice President Mike Pence. Palestinians refusing to meet with him. What do you think their strategy is here?
Well, I don't think that they really have a strategy. But I think the interesting thing to note is the huge difference between this visit of a Vice President of the United States and a previous visit in 2010 by another Vice President, Joe Biden, which was accompanied by huge acrimony over building within the boundaries of Jerusalem And the cordiality and the warmth of this visit with Pence's visit, I think it's an amazing change in the contrast, which just points to the volatility of the relationships between the US and Israel over the last few years. And this, of course, is a very welcome change. I think that the behavior of the Palestinians creates a great opportunity for Israel, and is to put aside the pretext that there is any chance of reaching an agreement with them. I think that, as Trump said when he acknowledged Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that it's time to tell the truth, and that pretending that it hasn't produced any results. I think we should expand this attitude to the whole Palestinian issue and stop pretending that basically that there's any chance of reaching an agreement with the Palestinians, and look for alternative solutions.
Let's bring it back then to the status of Jerusalem and what's happening right now. The United Nations Security Council is due to vote today on a draft resolution that is going to say that the status of Jerusalem has no legal effect. They're calling for it to be taken back. What would this mean for the recognition of Jerusalem and the international response at large?
Well, I think in many ways it depends on two things. A US veto, and B, the resolve of Israel in presenting its case to the world. I've been very critical of the Israeli government in its lack of resolve and lack of robustness in presenting Israel's case. And I think, as Trump said, it's absurd to think that Jerusalem could be anything else except the capital of Israel.
You're saying then that Israel's in a good position, but the region...
No, I didn't say they're in a good position. I think they could make the position good. I think they've been very remiss in presenting their case in general, as to the conflict in general and to Jerusalem in particular.
So in that case, how will Israel respond now in the face of all this international condemnation, as well as, of course, recent violence we've seen from the Gaza Strip over the last few weeks? Let's not forget as well that the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's currently under his, 8th corruption investigation. Is Netanyahu in a strong enough position now to react, and how will he do so?
Well, I'm not sure that Netanyahu's position makes... in a position which will make it easier for him to resist or to give in to international demand. I must point out that most of the government is far more hawkish than Netanyahu on the Palestinian issue, so I'm not sure that his perceived weakness will result in any international concessions.
All right, lastly, we mentioned this phone call between an Iranian and a Hamas commander. Do you think that they're preparing for an escalation with Israel?
Well, I certainly think that must be the working assumption. And again, this points to two things. A, the strategic failure of the way that the 2006 war was conducted against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the failure of the Obama policy towards Iran, which has greatly empowered them. And I assume that viewers have seen the recent report in Politico about Obama basically caving in and allowing Hezbollah to carry on its drug smuggling efforts in order to reach an agreement with Iran, which, if it's true, is completely scandalous and one hopes would lead to further repercussions.
Dr. Martin Sherman of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, thank you for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
In the meantime, an Iraqi Shiite militia chief has been sent to the Lebanese border with Israel, arriving earlier this month. Qais al-Ghazali is the commander of Iraq's Iranian-backed Asaib Ahl al-Haq militia. He was sent by Iran to mark out new military positions along the border from Admit in the west to Matula in the east. These posts said to be manned by Lebanese Shiite militia Hezbollah, as well as Iraqi Shiite militia loyal to Tehran. Debka File's military sources tracking al-Ghazali's route, crossing into Syria from Iraq at the end of November before visiting Soleimani's headquarters in the border town of Abu Kamal to discuss the transfer of 15,000 militiamen to be deployed in southern Lebanon. Now, by December, al-Ghazali had reached Damascus, escorted by a Hezbollah convoy to set up a new headquarters in the Syrian capital alongside the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces. Sources reporting the headquarters was established to coordinate the Syrian-based Shiite militias, that includes those imported from Pakistan and Afghanistan, for a reportedly campaign against Israel. The commander then drove west into Lebanon to meet with Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, before analysing Hezbollah positions along the border with the Israeli-controlled side of the Golan Heights. Al-Ghazali was filmed on that border region and overheard declaring the militia's readiness to stand with Lebanon and the Palestinians against Israeli occupation. Let's cross back to Dr. Martin Sherman, who's still with us in studio. Dr. Sherman, what significance does al-Ghazali's posting have on Lebanon and, of course, on Israel?
Well, I think it's a bit early to judge because the Lebanese government strongly protested his presence there and his excursion there. But I think it's something that would be very imprudent to ignore. And again, as I said just a few moments ago, I think this illustrates the strategic failure of Israel's conduct of the 2006 war and the Obama policy, which has empowered Iran, because if that policy had not been undertaken, if Iran hadn't been given the huge amount of money that has been given, if it hasn't been given the degrees of freedom that has been given, it wouldn't be able to do that. And so I think the prospect of a reinforcement of Shiite troops in southern Lebanon is something that Israel has to take into consideration very seriously, and perhaps even consider the option of preemption.
Serious concern there for Israel. Dr. Martin Sherman from the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
In neighboring Syria, Russian President Vladimir Putin told his troops that they had fought, quote, brilliantly and could return home victorious. He ordered the withdrawal of a significant part of Russia's military contingent and advocated switching focus to the political process for leading Syria to elections. Speaking at an annual news conference, Putin outlined the main obstacles to peace.
Что является главным препятствием для окончательного решения вопроса именно в Сирии, ну и в целом в борьбе с террором? В борьбе с террором в целом это повышение уровня образования и благосостояния и устранение исторических несправедливостей в регионе Ближнего Востока в целом и в мире в частности, глобально.
Debka Files revealing for the first time the heavy dissonance among the top echelons of the Kremlin and the Russian parliament that led to Putin's surprise visit to Syria. Officials pointing fingers at the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, for failing to capitalize on Moscow's military feats in Syria to build a broader international support base for furthering Putin's regional strategy in the Middle East. Lavrov, for his part, holds the Russian defense minister to account, maintaining that Sergei Shoigu was overly cautious on the battlefield for fear of military clashes with American forces in Syria. Meanwhile, the 8th round of peace talks concluded, with no agreement or progress made in Geneva, suffering a series of setbacks and delays. The two delegations did not have face-to-face negotiations, UN Special Envoy for Syria saying he sat down 7 times with the government and 11 times with the opposition.
I'm being very pragmatic about the fact that I am disappointed, because my disappointment comes from the fact that when you see the military situation going in the direction of the end, so I was expecting sufficient energy from everyone on the two delegations to ensure that we could have a beginning of a negotiation.
Let's bring in our second guest for this week's show, Dr. Mordechai Kedar from Israel's Bar-Ilan University. Thanks for being here today.
Pleasure.
We just heard there the UN Special Envoy to Syria, Stefan de Mistura, saying the military situation is heading towards its end. Russian President Vladimir Putin withdrawing some of his troops. Would you agree with this then and say the war is indeed coming to a close?
Well, it depends on which scale you talk about. If you talk about large scales, as we saw like a year or even more ago, definitely we are seeing the end of the war. However, to total end, which will stop every hostility in Syria, I think that long months will pass until we see really law and order all over the country.
We know that Russia is still playing a strong hand, propping up the al-Assad regime. Where will this leave the opposition, do you think, in terms of the future political transition and for the future of the country? I mean, over 500,000 people have been killed over the last 7 years, almost 7 years of civil war.
The remnants of the opposition will try to mingle within the population. In order to be there, they will make faces as if they are peaceful and they live their regular life, and they will wait for the minute which they will think that they can resume their rebellion. However, the regime is aware of it. And in my view, what the regime wants to do is to replace the population, to bring more Shia from Iraq, from Iran, from Afghanistan, and many other places which they can, in order to replace the population. Because, as we all know, it's not the first round. We have the first round of hostilities between the population and the regime already between 1976 and 1982. And this, what we are finishing now, 7 years, it's the second round. It can come every generation. This is why I think the regime today wants to replace the population by sending out all the Sunni Muslims and replacing them by Shia. Iran is more than willing to support this and to help it and to be the facilitator of changing Syria dramatically to a Shia state.
Talking of the Syrian people, there are still over 5 million displaced beyond Syria's borders. What options are there for those refugees, Dr. Mordechai?
Those Sunnis, I think in most cases they will not be let back because the regime doesn't want them and let them go to hell if they only could send them to hell. Shia might be welcome back to Syria if they have what to come to, because don't forget that many cities, towns, villages are totally destroyed in Syria. And rebuilding the country will need tremendous amounts of money, and I don't see this money waiting anywhere in the world. Europe is not in a situation which can enable it to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in Syria. The United States of America apparently has different priorities. And what? Russia, with its economic situation, which is rather bad. So this is why I don't see the wave of building in Syria to rebuild the country. So where those refugees, even if they want to come back to Syria, where exactly will they live? What exactly will they do? How will they make living when the infrastructure is destroyed, when organizations are destroyed? I really don't see this country coming back to its, I would say, healthy situation for many years from today.
A desperate situation there in Syria. Dr. Mordechai Kedar of Israel's Bar-Ilan University, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Shifting to Yemen now, and the United States has presented pieces of what it said were Iranian weapons supplied to the Iran-aligned Houthi militia in Yemen, describing it as conclusive evidence that Tehran was violating UN resolutions. The evidence was presented for the first time at the military hangar at Joint Base Anacostia Bolling, just outside of Washington, by the U.S. Defense Department, explaining that arms included charred remnants of the Iranian-made short-range ballistic missile fired from Yemen on November 4th towards the King Khalid International Airport just outside of Saudi Arabia's capital, as well as a drone and an anti-tank weapon recovered in Yemen by the Saudis. Iran denies supplying the Houthis with such weaponry. The unprecedented presentation by the Pentagon is part of its follow-through on President Trump's new Iran policy, which promises a far harder line towards Tehran. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley telling reporters that the collection of military debris provided irrefutable evidence of Iranian supply to the Houthis, accusing Tehran of standing in violation of its international obligations.
In this warehouse is concrete evidence of illegal Iranian weapons proliferation gathered from direct military attacks on our partners in the region. Behind me is an example of one of these attacks. These are the recovered pieces of a missile fired by Houthi militants from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. The missile's intended target was the civilian airport in Riyadh, through which tens of thousands of passengers travel each day. I repeat, the missile was used to attack an international civilian airport in a G20 country. Just imagine if this missile had been launched at Dulles Airport or JFK, or the airports in Paris, London, or Berlin. That's what we're talking about here. That's what Iran is actively supporting. Everyone has focused on the nuclear deal, and Iran has hidden behind the nuclear deal, constantly threatening to get out of it. But these are the things they're doing while we're all looking the other way. And these are the things that will be dangerous, that will lead us to the next North Korea if we don't do something to stop it.
Meantime, the US has issued a final warning to Riyadh to stop its indiscriminate bombardments of Yemen and to ease its sea and air blockades on areas under Houthi rebel control. Washington is threatening to cut off military and intelligence assistance to the Saudi-led coalition for their role in fighting Iran-backed insurgents. The country is in immediate need of urgent, unconditional humanitarian relief, with the UN saying 8.4 million people are a step away from famine, warning of a large-scale catastrophe. Since the assassination of the former president Ali Abdullah Saleh in Yemen last month, the coalition has intensified its campaign against the rebels. Over the weekend, Saudi-led warplanes bombing a wedding east of the capital, killing 10 women. Debka sources saying a strike earlier this week that killed 23 people, including prisoners, was the last straw for the Trump administration to threaten the withdrawal of its military assistance. That includes withdrawing mid-air, refueling planes, and intelligence markers for Houthi targets. Meanwhile, U.S. Aid Administrator Mark Green announcing a further $130 million in emergency aid. That raises U.S. assistance to nearly $768 million just over the past year. Now to a roundup of this week's headlines you may have missed. The news in brief. Police in Lebanon have arrested a local taxi driver in connection with the murder of British diplomat Rebecca Dykes. Her body was found on a motorway outside the Lebanese capital Beirut on the weekend, displaying signs of trauma. A security source said the initial investigation shows the motive was purely criminal and not political. In Saudi Arabia, Palestinian billionaire and chairman of the Amman-based Arab bank, Sabih al-Masri, has been released from custody to house arrest after being detained and forbidden to fly home to Amman. Debka File is reporting exclusively that the Saudi crown prince demanded the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, come to Riyadh, requesting him to step in line with Saudi policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict against Qatar and Turkey, or else forfeit Saudi and UAE assistance. A new Iraqi Kurdish militia is striking government and military targets in the north and east of the country. The white flags say they formed to seek vengeance for the Kurds in districts the Kurdish regional government once controlled, until a few months ago when it was taken over by the Iraqi government. A Belgian court is expected to set a new date for the trial of suspect Salah Abdeslam over a shooting in Brussels that led to his capture. Abdeslam is the sole surviving suspect of the November 2015 Paris attacks that left 130 people dead. He was due to stand trial in the Belgian capital later this week. A thick layer of smog has descended on the Iranian capital, home to 14 million residents. Authorities have closed all primary schools in Tehran except in 2 towns, shutting mines and cement factories, as well as reinforcing traffic restrictions in the capital's center. And the Farah Choir performed in Damascus this week at one of the city's most famous churches. Celebrating its 40th anniversary, the 500-member choir filled the Zaytun church with melodies in what the conductor called an expression of the strength of will of the Syrian people. We'll leave you with that beautiful sound of Christmas from the Farah Choir in Syria. We're also taking a break here at the Debka Files for the holidays, but we'll be back with you in just 2 weeks' time with more breaking news, analysis and insight from the region and beyond. Thanks for watching and happy holidays. Bye-bye.